Good morning, friends. Welcome to OBEJournal2019 number 2. It's been a while since number 1, and a number of small issues have got in the way, and I'm not even sure all the small issues are out of the way at the moment, but I will persevere. And greetings to you all. And I hope your own out-of-body adventures and lucid dreams have been entertaining and challenging in the interim. And the discoveries go on. No matter what stage of the journey you are at, the discoveries will continue to uncover what either you think you don't know, or what you have the strange feeling you're remembering. As we move toward what is called in the traditional literature continuity of consciousness, there are many delights in store for us and challenges. And part of what keeps us from continuity of consciousness, that is, no actual winking out of consciousness. You fall asleep, you leave the body, you become an astral being. You stay an astral being until it's time to wake up, you come back. Now, lots of you do this anyway, right now, but you're not remembering. And that suits you to a certain degree because you feel that your conscious daily self is not ready for such knowledge. And it would be too much for it, too overwhelming. And to a certain degree, you're right. The burden of continuous consciousness is quite great. And is it like putting a sack on your shoulders? Well, it could be. You could compare it to that. It could also be compared to taking a sack off your shoulders, depending on your perspective, I suppose. So try to see it that way as you struggle with your sort of, I only remember this, a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Try to see what part of you is holding yourself back, and I would suggest that it's the one I have outlined. Because don't forget, your astral self is out there every night doing things, even if it's just amusing itself by floating around. It's still out there. You are attracted to this video and others of a similar nature because you want to uncover your astral self, your greater astral self. And you're allowing it to happen, but only in little degrees. And am I challenging the wisdom of that part of you that says, no, let's just open this up slowly? Because the shock of discovery could overcome the conscious self to the point where it wants to fold up and hide. I understand that. But I'm suggesting to you that perhaps it's time to uncover the mystery for yourself. Perhaps it's time to take on that burden, if indeed it seems like a burden to you. I don't have continuity of consciousness myself, and I wouldn't want you to think that I did. As you've been following along in this series, and I think quite a lot of you have, 2017, 2018, well, the spirit contacts I'm more passive. I'm right here in my body, feeling the spirit close to me. Those spirits are astral beings, but I'm pretty much meditating, entranced here in my body when I'm doing those. But the explorations that I've done on a live-to-air basis, and the ones which would seem to be me recalling, going into meditation and recalling what I've done an hour or a few hours before, are my level of consciousness. And you might well ask, well, Gordon, what are you holding back from? And it's been an interesting puzzle for me too. And I think perhaps I'm attached to that legend, that story, which says it's wise to uncover this stuff bit by bit. Because the burden of discovering it all at once is, as Roger Waters wrote of Sid Barrett, you reached for the secret too soon. That is a salient point, for sure. Psychedelics did encourage us users to reach for the secret too soon. And I am pleased to notice that the resurgence in society's acceptance and increased use of psychedelics for a number of issues. One reads articles about this every other day. So that's a great thing, coming from my generation where it was heavily suppressed after the initial experimentation period. One hopes that out-of-body experience, or at least probably starting with spirit contact, I imagine that's going to be the first thing that hits the mainstream. I mean, obviously it has, with mediums being on network television, or shows about mediums being on network television. That's been ongoing for a number of years now, or cable, and that's a spirit contact of a type for us all to experience. But as we patiently wait for the various mechanisms that various people are developing to sort of like a two-way radio or telephone or Skype to the spirit world, that I think will be the thing that breaks the egg and helps make the omelet. Is that something that anyone can use if they would so choose to do it? And right now we have various researchers and practitioners recommending that you just sit down and communicate with your dear departed. Just do it. Sit down and do it. Telepathically, I would imagine, is their modality. And I noticed this very recently on the website of Richard Martini. And I thought, interesting, that's what I've been recommending to people in the last year or so. And the direct contact, the instant transfer, rather than the ritualized efforts or meditations around that, just to do it and see what happens. And great to see someone else recommending it. I'm pretty sure his name is Richard Martini. Makes movies and interviews people about their experiences. Website, books. So, developments. Meanwhile, we continue to exist in a troubled planet with many tragic events unfolding every other day, if not every day, every hour. But again, that is media bringing all that to our doorstep. Wouldn't it be different if there was a daily acknowledgement of not people leaving the planet physically, but arriving? Reports of hundreds of successful birthings and many shots of beautiful babies being born around the world. Now, wouldn't that... Here's today's arrivals, hundreds of them. A little archive that you could check, because we are focused on those that leave the planet. We're not so much, unless you're actually, someone's in your family's having a baby, not focused on those coming in. I just think it would alter our daily perceptions and feelings. Getting on to Notre Dame. I went there just after the fire, or after I heard about the fire. And floating through a fire in your astral body can be a challenge if you are not practiced. There's a tendency to not consciously recall that you're in your astral body and think that the physical flames will harm what you assume is your physical body, but of course it's not. And that's, as I may have mentioned on earlier videos, that's a test one can often go through in one's early days when one is being trained by guides. They will have you fly through a forest fire and see if you freak out and go back to your body. The challenge being to remember that you are in your astral body and unaffected by such. Anyway, I went through that many years ago, and some others of you will probably have gone through it too. So, taking an interest in the Notre Dame situation, the great welling up of national emotion, if not worldwide emotion, and it's such an ancient monument to faith and beauty. Many of us had friends who would put up Facebook posts and say, "Oh, I was there just 2 weeks ago." It really brought it home. It's a very popular tourist destination, and many millions of people can relate to it. There was definitely a feeling as I passed through of great, intense soul energy. Many spirits were there, shedding their love and light upon the situation and the firefighters. I felt the presence of many spirits, including the Deva of Paris, if you might want to call it that. All great cities have devas hanging over them, overshadowing them, overlighting them. All these phrases have been used. I've talked about the Deva over where I am, Toronto, and the lake right beside Toronto, Lake Ontario. And I perceived the Deva there to be amongst its many activities and tasks, synthesizing the energies coming up from the city and blending them with the energies coming up from the lake, which are more nature oriented, of course. The Paris Deva is a great being, and I'm not claiming to have perceived the whole being. You perceive that parts of a Deva which you are able to receive. It's all to do about one's receptive abilities. And as we grow in spirit, our receptive abilities grow too. So the Deva was hovering over. There were also more than one or two, how shall I say, lower astral spirits who I feel were connected with the onset of the fire, whether it be a computer error or something foolish done by one of the workmen. I'm not pointing fingers here, I'm just suggesting possibilities. Spirits who have a great enmity to the basic elements of progressive spirituality and Catholic spirituality in particular, were there. And they weren't exactly shedding light, no. They were laughing. They were smug. They were wreaking vengeance, or thought they were. As you can imagine, if you've done any studies of religious history, the Catholic Church has accumulated many enemies over the centuries. Many enemies who would like to see it falter and collapse. And it's the dark side of Catholicism has certainly the Inquisition, the suppression of individual rights, the sexual abuse, all these aspects have generated not only opposition from those that were punished and betrayed, but generated, how shall I say, sympathetic darkness. When you act on the dark side, dark spirits come to you in sympathy, because it's like attracts like. Just as if you act from love and compassion, charity, mercy, spirits of light will be attracted to you and will sympathize and harmonize with your activity. I'm portraying it fairly simply, but that is essentially what goes on. And not just when you're acting in the moment. The Catholic Church is an entity of historical significance, just as all the other churches are, and accumulates this kind of karma over the centuries. Now, that's not to say every church that catches fire is a result of bad karma. It's not. In a town that I used to live in about 15 years ago, there were 2 different churches caught fire at different times. And quite handsome old churches, not cathedrals, of course, but just, fine old architecture. And one was caused by a teenager feeling mischievous and setting a fire in the front doorway or something like that. And it looked like the other one was a bit arsonish too, although I don't think they actually managed to nail somebody for it. So often it's, childish mischievousness that burns churches down. And there's 2 examples from my recent past too. Past as a citizen of a town. But the forces of light and the forces of darkness are always at odds with each other. They're always competing. They're always engaged in an active rivalry. On the smallest level, the lowest level, like your good and bad angels, you know, and to the greater level of nations who have their good and bad spirits aiding and abetting them no matter what they do. And am I saying that the Notre Dame fire is a result of this type of activity? It's one of the results. It's not the only one. There was certainly enough lower spirits, nasty, mischievous, malicious spirits in Notre Dame as I passed through observing. Many other spirits too. There's often, as I pointed out in my books, deceased human beings who don't wish to go on to the afterlife proper, or are afraid to do so, and stay around their favorite places on the physical plane. And sometimes those favorite places are churches. Often they're race courses and places of major league sports, where they get to continue their favorite activity anytime they want. And the same with church goers. They may feel unworthy of whatever their belief system tells them about the heaven worlds, through a perception of their own sins, and feeling unforgiving of their own sins that keeps them on this planet, on the earth plane, and often in churches, because they like the vibration there. It's a pleasant vibration. If they've been a churchgoer, it's a vibration they're accustomed to and comfortable with. And in Notre Dame, certainly had plenty of those. They're not as powerful or big a spirit as a deva or an angel, but they're there. They're like big lights, little lights. There's lots of little lights. And some of them didn't even realize the place was on fire, as I'm sure they're living in a thought form of the place rather than the place. Cast your mind back to many ghost stories that you will have heard, resident ghosts, who will stay in a home the way it was when they lived there, and will ignore the renovations, upgrades, new rooms, etc., etc. And sometimes will oppress those who try to do the renovations because they're resentful. And in many cases, it has been revealed that the people, if they're not resentful and angry about the renovations, they're just completely ignorant. They just don't know, because they're living in an idealized thought form of the structure when they were alive. They don't allow it to change, and are definitely not aware that it has changed. So to that extent, there was definitely a number of spirits who were living in the thought form of Notre Dame, and quite happy there. As you know, these Gothic cathedrals are very inspiring places. When the sun's shining through the stained glass and the great height of the structure, and the vibrations from the many masses that have been celebrated there over the centuries, that all builds an atmosphere. And also you can add the sense of atmosphere that is built by being a great symbol of national pride, as it is for the French, and rightly so. All those Gothic cathedrals were, when they were built in that 200-year time period, are amazing chalices of magic, if you like. And there are many accounts by travelers of transcendent magical experiences that they had within those structures. all the Gothic cathedrals, not just Notre Dame. And it has been suggested by many researchers that the masons who built those, decade by decade, were serving, a greater vision of spirit and trying to provide a resting place for spirit on earth. Built consciously by and directed by initiated masons. And given the amazing geometries involved in the structure, shall I just use that little phrase? It's pretty obvious to me that initiated masons, as they like to call themselves, were deeply involved in the conception and creation of these marvelous structures. Now, I would suggest to you as an exercise, if you're so interested, to sometime do an astral trip to Notre Dame yourself. There's no safety perimeter around it, psychic, I mean, as there is in military and intelligence service buildings around the planet. You can't get into one of those underground air bases. Force fields and whatnot. But there's nothing like that around Notre Dame. And although there are plenty of, angels of the light that will be interested if you have malicious intention, which none of you do, but they would glom onto you fairly quick if you did. So have a go, project yourself there, and just see what you see and feel what you feel. And I'm not suggesting that you should have a similar experience to mine. Have your own experience and feel good about it. There are many levels on which one can plug in to, shall we say, ongoing events like this. And whatever level that you plug into is valid and useful and not to be denied by anybody. It could be a significant part of your journey. On the other hand, it may just be a mere detail, and you may not feel the presences that I felt, and you may not feel it's important to feel those presences. Merely a suggestion on my part. And just if you feel constrained by your own doubts, try using the meditation that I put up. It's reposted on my Facebook page of an older, I think it's 2018 OBEJournal 2018 number 2, and that's a guided meditation to take off and explore. And just use that and check out Notre Dame if you're in such a mood. And enjoy. And with that, I will bid you farewell. Au revoir, mes amis. And we'll return fairly soon. And if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, I hope you're enjoying the spring as I am. and watching the nature come back to life day by day. It's a great pleasure. And it's a great pleasure to be with you. So long.